Hello, everybody. I'm Zarina Harris. I'm your friendly neighborhood housing advocate. And today we're going to talk about opportunity zones again. A little bit of follow-up on HR 4999, my bill. We've got a few co-sponsors on there. We're going to talk about mad senators, and we're also going to talk about some programs that have come out that seem like they're going to be helping. We're going to dig into it and see if they really are. Let's go. So the first thing we're actually going to talk about is a census tract, because they're very important to opportunity zones. So a census tract was actually created by Dr. Walter Laidlaw in 1906, and they were first implemented in 8 different cities in the 1910 census. Now, since then, standardization and, things have just gotten better, but it wasn't until 2000 that all the counties in the United States actually had a census tract. Now, the purpose of a census tract is to have a relatively homogeneous area, about 4,000 people with the same economics, the same living conditions, same characteristics, etc., like that. Now, census tracts are important because this was the mechanism that they used to determine what an opportunity zone was going to be. So the US governors got together and the mayor of DC, and they had to designate which of their census tract could qualify to be an opportunity zone. So here's the qualifications. First, it had to have a poverty rate of 20% or more. Next, it had to have a median family income, if it was in a metro area, that was no greater than 80% of the statewide or the metropolitan area, or if it was in a non-metropolitan area, it had to be no more than 80% of the median statewide income. In addition to that, up to 25% of the census tracts in a given state could be designated as an opportunity zone, and then an additional 5% of each jurisdiction could qualify if they met a different set of standards, which was A, that they had a low income opportunity zone in like right next to it, contiguous to it, and that particular census zone, census tract, did not exceed 125% of median in family income of the adjacent opportunity zone. So basically, you could be designated an opportunity zone if you're right next to one, but still not necessarily a particularly rich area. So under this scope, the Brookings Institutes determined that 57% of all census tracts in the United States technically qualified as an opportunity zone. Thank God they narrowed it down. We ended up having about 12% of all census tracts in the US designated an opportunity zone. Now, remember in our previous video, we talked about Sean Parker, right? And we talked about the fact that he decided when he saw all these poor Africans, whatever, and realized, hey, we have that kind of stuff back home. He decided, hey, if we use capital gains and put it into these poor areas, we can really help them and everybody wins. We don't have to pay a capital gains tax, and they get more access to jobs and revitalization in their area. There's one problem with that. Rich people don't play fair. And let me show you why. The Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, personally intervened to secure an opportunity zone tax break for a wealthy investor, fraudster, and longtime friend, Michael Milken. He owns the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center. Now, this industrial center is an industrial park that includes Tesla, Switch Citadel, Google, and the 67,000-acre blockchain LLC property. So, yeah, that sounds like a poor area. Now, he denied any involvement with the decision-making that this becomes an opportunity zone, but he did not deny that Steve Mnuchin was chartered on his private jet just weeks before the decision was made. The next one is billionaire Dan Gilbert. He's the founder of Quicken Loans and the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, has spent the last decade buying buildings in downtown Detroit, amassing nearly 100 properties, and so completely dominating the area, it's known as Gilbertville. He gave $750,000 to Trump's inaugural fund and got parts of downtown Detroit labeled an opportunity zone. In fact, his lobbyist was so involved that they forgot to erase his name off the rezoning map before they submitted it. Former Governor Rick Scott of Florida designated a marina in West Palm Beach, Florida as an opportunity zone after being lobbied by the owner of said marina, Wayne Huizenga Jr. He's the son of a billionaire, founder of Waste Management and Auto Nation. A marina, where they park yachts. Under Armour CEO Kevin Plank, who's also a billionaire, got his peninsula in Baltimore labeled an opportunity zone, an area he already spent $100 million in through various shell companies buying up land due to a geographical mapping error. Yeah, so what does this mean to everyday people? This means that instead of the capital gains going into low income areas, they're going to go into rich areas, or they're going to go towards projects that rich people were already working on, except this time they have a major, huge tax break. Now, all of this buffoonery led some Democrats and concerned citizens to write up various bills that were going to either counteract some of the devastation that opportunity zones were going to do, or adjust the bill itself or the law itself so that it really does go to benefit the people that it initially was supposed to in the first place. Now, there were 4 bills that were highlighted specifically concerning opportunity zones that were written up into a letter that was submitted to the House Committee of Ways and Means and the Senate Committee on Finance. Now, who wrote this up was none other than Whip Clyburn. And the one that really pissed off Tim Scott is HR 5042, which is the Opportunity Zone Reform Act. Now, Tim Scott got big mad. You see this picture of him? When he heard that Whip Clyburn was, coming up with all these bills that were supposed to counteract and or change his Opportunity Zone law. Now, here's what he had to say. Quote, "This is the second misguided attempt by congressional Democrats in the last 2 weeks to wreck the Opportunity Zone initiative under the guise of improvement. Make no mistake, Congressman Clyburn's legislation, which is very similar to a bill introduced by Senator Wyden last week in the Senate, will needlessly punish low-income communities who are hoping to use Opportunity Zones to transform areas left behind." Now, here's some other things that I picked up also that he said, which are very interesting to me. He says more than 96% of total zones did not show any signs of gentrification at the time that they were nominated. Now, really, the problem with opportunity zones is not that they were already gentrified areas, but that they have the potential to now become gentrified areas. So this is sort of a straw man argument saying, well, 96% of them have no gentrification. Well, they're low income areas, and if they were gentrified, they wouldn't have qualified in the first place. Catch the grift. He goes on to say, another example of the failure of their bills is that they would list, quote, health centers as a sin business, which excludes them from eligibility in the initiative. What does that mean? Basically, you can't build a YMCA or after school programs around physical education, yada, yada, yahtzee. The legislation introduced today does not even mention reporting requirements once. So here's what I decided to do. I decided to go and look up these bills myself. Now, do you understand how boring that is to sit on the government website and read bills from a bunch of attorneys and politicians who don't know how to write in plain English? But I did it just for you. Here's what I found. Of the 4 bills that were listed in the letter from Whip Clyburn, 3 out of the 4 actually do call for reporting. HR 5042 is the Opportunity Zone Reform Act. This is the one that's got Senator Tim in a bunch. Now, I read over this, and I'm not going to go every single thing, but basically, here's what they're actually calling for. This first one is a modification to the tracts of qualified opportunity zones. Basically, what this is saying is that they need to go back over the opportunity zones that have been designated to make sure that they actually are in low poverty areas. So that's going to pretty much eliminate all these billionaires from getting their projects, funded as an opportunity zone. There is a call for replacement zones, as you can see here. So we're not exactly sunsetting. And remember what I said earlier about 57% of census tracts being technically qualified for opportunity zones. So when Tim Scott says, oh, he's gonna take it away from these 4 or 5 different opportunity zones, it's not as if there's not a replacement zone that can qualify for it that also has poor people in it. Here's the next thing that I found. Certain property excluded from quality opportunity zone business property. They basically are self-storage property, parking lots, stadiums, and disqualified rental property. Basically, if you are building a rental property, whether it's an apartment, a condo, or anything with multiple units in it, unless 50% of those units are designated to low-income people, it is disqualified. So what we're really seeing here is an attempt to get rid of these opportunity zones that these billionaires have sort of finessed their way into, and Tim Scott being really, really upset about it. I personally didn't see where healthcare businesses were going to be eliminated or health facilities or anything like that. But again, I didn't read all the little fine details. But here's what Clyburn actually has to say about this bill himself. He said the Opportunity Zone Reform Act would do the following: eliminate loopholes that could allow sinless investments like casinos and prohibit investments in stadiums, parking lots, and luxury apartments. That's pretty much what we just read in the bill. It would terminate zones that are not low income or impoverished while allowing states to replace zones that are terminated. And finally, it would tighten existing rules to ensure that this generous incentive goes to productive new investments that are actually in zones and not to projects that were already underway or investors are trying to park their money in tax-free. Now, personally, I don't see anything wrong with this next bill. I actually think it's pretty good, and asking for 50% of like the apartments that are built to be low income is actually more than what I was asking for, which is 20%, and I think it's pretty bold. So I don't see why Tim Scott is so upset about it. Now, here's something else that Tim Scott said. He said there was no call to action for any kind of reporting. So I went and I looked up this bill again to see if there was any kind of call to action about reporting and accountability. And sure enough, here's what I found. Sure enough, on this bill on Section 7, we have what's called the Gal Report, which says no later than each applicable date, the Comptroller General of the United States shall submit to Congress a report on the effectiveness of the provisions of subchapter 7, blah, blah, blah. The matters that are included is the distribution of investments, yada, yada, yada. So you can read all this stuff by yourself: housing costs, income distribution among residents in the zone, the economic benefits provided, the extent of the practical impact of provisions, and yada, yada, yada. So here's the thing. When someone is trying to gaslight you and they are not trying to do something in particular because they don't want to piss somebody off, they set up these straw man arguments. Was there anything in there about healthcare facilities not being built? No. Is there something in the fine print that maybe they can stretch and say that's what it does? Perhaps, because I'm not reading over this bill with a fine-tooth comb. But you kind of understand the way that Clyburn's trying to do this is he's trying to make sure that it really does go to low-income people. And that's the general consensus that I get from his bill. Does he have something in there that says you have to rezone something if it's not a low-income area? He absolutely does. Does that affect the rich billionaires who kind of donated and finagled their way into it? Absolutely. Now, here's the last thing that Senator Scott said that really was interesting. Now, he said that he and Cory Booker have set off an initiative to have reporting included into the bill. And I did find that. But what I found was they started that initiative back in May of 2019 or so, and they've only had one additional co-sponsor to get on that bill. So you mean to tell me that virtually all year you had this thought to have some reporting done, and you were only able to get one additional person in November of 2019, 2 months before opportunity zones come out, to actually get on your bill and co-sign it? Now, there's another bill that had some co-signers on it, but if you add all of these up with all this reporting, we're not even talking about 20 people who have co-signed any of these bills to have any kind of reporting done on opportunity zones whatsoever. And furthermore, if you really, really, really thought that, hey, I'm going to do something that's going to help low-income, poor people, why wouldn't you just initiate and have reporting done in the initial bill when you had to go ask Trump to include it in his tax law? I don't know. That's just a thought. You've been working on it for so long. So it's kind of like poor people are the afterthought. The main people who were going to benefit for this and are going to benefit from this are rich people with a lot of capital gains who own buildings downtown or have these $150 million projects already underway, and now they get a tax incentive and no capital gains to do a project that they were already going to do. And that leads me to this next part. So in addition to this, there was 3 programs that have come out that sort of dovetail their way into opportunity zones. And shout out to Black STEM Global, who shot this to me over on Twitter to ask me what I felt about these programs. Of course, I didn't know anything about them, so I had to go research them. So the first program is actually from the Department of Education. This is Betsy DeVos, whatever, Devil. Expanding opportunity through quality charter programs. Basically, that's a program that she has to extend grants to people who want to start a charter school. And the only thing that she really said was that they're just going to prioritize if somebody wants to do one in an opportunity zone. I haven't seen anything really change about that. And to be quite honest, I'm in housing, I'm not in education. So I really don't have a qualified opinion to be putting on charter schools. Some charter schools are great. Some charter schools are just terrible. I don't know enough about them to kind of give an opinion on that. but the only change really is that they are prioritizing, if you want to build a charter school in the opportunity zone, that you're more likely to get a grant than if you wanted to build it somewhere else. The second one is that HUD increased the 203K program. So if you don't know what a 203K loan is, it's a loan from the FHA. It's like a fixer-up loan. So you basically are granted up to $35,000 over the sales price of the house, with the intent that that $35,000 will go towards repairs. So you buy a fixer-upper kind of house, and they will give you an extra $35,000 to fix it up in whatever way that it needs. Well, what FHA decided to do was increase that to $50,000 that they will give you above the sales price of the house in order to fix it up if it's in an opportunity zone. The catch with that is that they're only doing 15,000 loans that way, and it's first come, first serve. So basically that's less than, that kind of shakes out to about 2 loans per opportunity zone that are even qualified to get that. 2 is not enough per opportunity zone. I'm sorry. So it's like they give you something and then they take it back. In addition to that, there's no real incentive to do that, because the whole point of an opportunity zone is to park capital gains, and you going to get a loan doesn't even qualify for the tax incentives of doing something in an opportunity zone. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'll get more money, but for what? And finally, the SBA programs have changed. Really, the only one that was significant to me was the 504 loan program. And that one basically provides small businesses with money for real estate and buildings and machinery. They basically said that initially you have to provide 1 job per $75,000 that they'll guarantee, and they really just upped it to $85,000 that you have to provide a job for when you're doing that in the opportunity zone. So it's a difference of about $10,000. Their 7A loans, basically the language just includes like, hey, if this is in an opportunity zone, and that's pretty much it. The problem with the SBA is they went from giving Blacks like 8% at the beginning of 2008. And as of right now, the SBA gives Black people about 3%. So it went down and it kind of came back up, because at one point they were giving 1.7%. I think this was like in 2014, 1.7% of all SBA loans went to Black people. So it's improved since then up to 3% for 2019. But 3% of a small business loan really doesn't mean anything. And so what does $10,000 extra mean to you, or $10,000 incentive on a loan that you can't get in the first place? So those are my opinion on the 3 programs that Black STEM Global asked me about. Again, like it's not really positive, but it is what it is. So here are my final thoughts. Some of you might be like, Zareen, all you do is poo-poo opportunity zones. Is there anything good about them? I think there are. I think there has to be some regulation, though. There has to be some legislation to make sure that the intended purpose of opportunity zones really are going to do just that. Because there's loopholes all over the place in this bill, and we've already begun to see what the rich are going to do. They're gonna fund their own projects that are already in prominent areas, and they're not gonna give a crap about poor people, even though poor people are the reason why they're getting the tax break, right? So poor people are just being used over and over and over again. So do I think this could be a law or an initiative that really does help poor people? I do, if we get the right laws in place. And that's why I wrote, or helped to write, HR 4999, the Opportunity Zone Fairness and Inclusion Act. And I don't think I made it clear last time what it really does. But basically, this basically includes the community in the say-so of what gets built. They also get access to capital because it's required, or at least as it's written, that 50% of a qualified opportunity fund give 50% of their capital towards a business or a business owner or something like that. 20% of all units that are created have to be low income. And then there is a call for reporting. So this idea that Tim Scott had, before, or nobody's asking for reporting and that's what we want. It's not true. There's a bunch of bills out there asking for reporting and some accountability on opportunity zones. And until we have that in place, the rich is going to do whatever they want. They're going to find every single loophole they can not to help poor people and to help themselves. So there was an article that was sent to me about a guy in South LA. He has a company called Solar Impact. And basically he creates opportunities for low income people to have access to housing. Now, I have my personal opinions because he's created like 1,500 units since he started his company. And he was working in areas that are now designated as opportunity zones. So his heart's in the right place with who he wanted to help anyway. And it just so happened that that place got labeled an opportunity zone. He's creating rental units, which you guys know my opinion about rent. Long-term renting, I think, leads to wealth extraction. I do know that there are certain times and circumstances where renting is actually the better choice. But long-term, I really think ownership is the way to go. And if you really want poor people to prosper, you have to have them to own something and to build wealth over time. And I don't know if he's doing that. I do know he's doing a project that's, in my opinion, like a WeWork project. He's trying to build a space for businesses to come and sort of work and create jobs, which is great. But the problem is, like we mentioned before, is that 3% of SBA loans go to Black people. So it's not enough capital. There's not enough money for Black people to create businesses that create a lot of jobs. So I'm not knocking the guy, but I'm just saying, it's very hard to fix poverty in a vacuum, but it's even harder when there are loopholes to get out of even doing that. So that's just my opinion on it. HR 4999 is really the only bill that's out there that even calls for any kind of inclusion or fairness to the communities that are going to be affected by this. And ultimately, the problem with opportunity zones is that it's really gentrification. And we all know gentrification fixes the place, but it doesn't fix the people. And that's really what we have to call for. So including the community and having them have a say and what can and can't be done with opportunity zones in HR 4999 is really the way to go, because it's the only one kind of focused on the people themselves, besides the one that are actually calling for like reporting. So the next steps, and I don't know if I made this clear in my last video, but the next steps is really to call up your congressperson. If your family member lives in an opportunity zone, if you live in an opportunity zone, or if you happen to know this congressperson is over X amount of opportunity zones, you call them up and you say, hey, I heard that there's a bill out there that includes the community inside of an opportunity zone so that they can benefit and not be gentrified out of it. Are you guys familiar with that? They're probably gonna say no. And then you tell them it's HR 4999 and I wanted to know if you guys would sponsor that because I have a family member, or I live in an opportunity zone, or I happen to know people, friends of mine who are in an opportunity zone, and I do not want them to be gentrified out of the area and not benefit from all this capital that's coming into it. That's the ask. Don't go in there with your chest down and like, why aren't you on this bill, son? That's not gonna work. They don't like that kind of stuff. But if you keep calling them like, hey, why haven't you co-sponsored the bill? I called you last week. Hey, I called you last week. I called you 2 weeks ago. Then you're going to annoy them enough and put enough pressure on them that they're actually going to read the bill and they're actually going to co-sponsor it. So that's what we have to do. Opportunity zones go into effect January 2020. So I highly, highly, highly think that you really need to get on this very, very quickly about co-sponsoring the bill. Who knows when it's going to get passed? We have to have the majority. But if we can at least get all the CBC members on it and put that, like actually hold them accountable to their jobs, then I feel like we're accomplishing something, because after that, they can go tell all their friends and do a lot of the footwork for us. So that is my ask. This is my second video on opportunity zones. I have a feeling I'm going to be making a whole lot more, but a lot of research goes into this. It's tiring, and these bills are boring. So that's it. I'm done. Y'all go co-sponsor the bill.